Word about the stranger's music spread quickly through the town, like ripples in a pond. At first, it was just a few people, curious neighbors, or those passing by who stopped to listen. But soon, more and more townsfolk began showing up at the little shop, drawn by the stories they'd heard. Some came out of curiosity, others because they were desperate for relief from their own struggles. No matter why they came, one thing was certain. Once they heard the music, they kept coming back. The stranger didn't seem to mind the growing crowd. He played his piano with the same quiet focus, as if he were unaware of the audience gathering around him. Each melody felt different, yet somehow familiar, like it had been written just for the listener. A farmer who had been worrying about his crops during a dry spell found himself humming along to a tune that seemed to echo his frustration, and then, oddly enough, his hope. A young boy who rarely spoke smiled shyly when a playful, skipping rhythm made him think of running through fields. Even the elderly woman who spent her days knitting alone in her house returned home with a spring in her step, humming a gentle lullaby under her breath. What struck everyone most was how personal the music felt. It wasn't just background noise. It was as if the notes reached into the deepest corners of their hearts, pulling out emotions they hadn't known how to express. One afternoon, a man who ran the local hardware store walked in looking tense and distracted. He sat quietly in the corner while the stranger played, his shoulders slowly relaxing with each note. By the time the song ended, he looked lighter, almost like a weight had been lifted off him. When someone asked if he was okay, he simply nodded and said, "I don't know what it is about this place, but I feel better." As the days went on, the shop became a kind of sanctuary. People brought chairs from home, creating an informal seating area outside. Kids would sit cross-legged on the floor, mesmerized by the way the stranger's hands moved over the keys. Parents exchanged smiles as their babies fell asleep to the soothing tunes. Strangers struck up conversations, sharing bits of their lives over cups of coffee or slices of pie brought by the baker down the street. The atmosphere was warm, inviting, and full of unspoken connection. Even the mayor, who was known for being distant and reserved, started visiting. At first, he lingered near the edges of the crowd, trying not to draw attention. But eventually, he too found himself sitting closer, letting the music wash over him. After one particularly moving piece, he stood up and clapped softly, surprising everyone. "Thank you," he said simply, before walking away. It was a small gesture, but it meant something to see someone so guarded let his guard down, even for a moment. The stranger never asked for anything in return. He didn't charge money, nor did he seek recognition. Yet, the impact of his music was undeniable. It wasn't just entertainment, it was healing. And as the weeks passed, the townspeople realized that this wasn't just about beautiful melodies. It was about connection, understanding, and finding solace in a world that often felt overwhelming. They didn't know much about the man behind the piano, but one thing was clear. His music had changed them in ways they couldn't fully explain. Isco expand crow without heading 400 words Mayan simple English words. Part 4. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green hills and thick woods, life was simple but heavy. The people here weren't unhappy, but they carried their own share of burdens, some visible, others hidden deep inside. There was the baker who worked long hours to support his family after losing his wife, the schoolteacher who felt lonely despite being surrounded by kids all day, and the elderly man who sat on the same bench every afternoon, staring at the horizon as if waiting for something that never came. One crisp morning, the calm rhythm of the town was interrupted by an unusual sight. A stranger appeared, pulling a wooden cart with an old piano perched precariously on top. The piano looked worn out, its once glossy surface now scratched and faded, but it had a certain charm about it. The stranger didn't say much. He just nodded politely when someone greeted him and went straight to renting the empty storefront near the park. The townsfolk were curious. Who was this man? Why had he come here with nothing but an old piano? Some whispered that he might be running from trouble. Others thought he could be a traveling musician looking for inspiration. But no one really knew. Days passed, and the stranger began spending hours each day inside the shop, playing soft, gentle tunes on the piano. At first, only a few notes would drift through the cracks of the closed door, but soon, entire melodies filled the air, wrapping around the town like a warm blanket. People started pausing in their tracks to listen. A mother pushing her baby stroller stopped near the shop, closing her eyes as the music washed over her tired mind. A group of children playing tag slowed down, tilting their heads toward the sound. Even the grumpy shopkeeper across the street found himself humming along while arranging cans on his shelves. The music wasn't loud or flashy. It was simple, soothing, almost like it understood the weight everyone carried. No one dared to step inside yet. The stranger kept to himself, focused entirely on his piano. He seemed lost in his world, fingers dancing effortlessly over the keys, creating sounds that felt both familiar and new. The melodies weren't cheerful or sad. They were somewhere in between, like a comforting hug during tough times. It was as if the music spoke directly to the heart, easing worries and calming restless thoughts without needing words. As days turned into weeks, the mystery of the stranger grew, but so did the town's connection to his music. People began rearranging their routines just to catch a few moments of his playing. They didn't know his name or where he came from, but somehow his presence and his music was becoming a part of their lives. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would change them forever. Isco Expand Crow without heading 400 words mind simple English words. Part 2. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. Among the growing crowd of curious listeners, there was one person who felt an inexplicable pull toward the music. She was a young woman who spent most of her days in the town's small library, surrounded by books but feeling more alone than ever. Her fiancé had passed away unexpectedly a year ago, leaving her heart shattered and her life directionless. Since then, she had thrown herself into work, avoiding anything that might remind her of the happiness she once knew. But even the quiet sanctuary of the library couldn't silence the ache inside her. One evening, as she walked home through the park, the soft strains of the stranger's piano reached her ears. At first, she tried to ignore it, quickening her pace to escape the sound. But something about the melody, a gentle, lilting tune, stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't cheerful or mournful. It was something in between, like a whispered understanding of pain. Against her better judgment, she followed the music until she stood outside the open door of the shop. Hesitant, she lingered for a moment before stepping inside. The room was dimly lit, with sunlight streaming through dusty windows, casting golden patterns on the floor. The stranger sat at the piano, his back to her, completely absorbed in his playing. He didn't turn around or acknowledge her presence, but somehow the music seemed to wrap around her like a comforting embrace. She leaned against the wall, letting the notes wash over her. Each chord felt like it was reaching into places she had locked away. The memories of laughter, the warmth of a hand she would never hold again, the dreams that now fell out of reach. As the final note faded into silence, she realized tears were streaming down her face. Embarrassed, she wiped them quickly, ready to slip out unnoticed. But before she could move, the stranger turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers. There was no pity in his gaze, just a quiet understanding, as if he had seen her pain reflected in his own life. For a brief moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence between them heavier than words. Then, without saying a thing, he gave a slight nod, as if to say, "I know." Feeling both exposed and strangely comforted, she left the shop that evening with a weight lifted off her chest. It wasn't that her grief had vanished. It was still there, tucked deep within her. But for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe again. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the melody played softly in her mind, keeping the darkness at bay. She didn't understand how or why, but the stranger's music had touched something in her soul, sparking a flicker of hope she thought she'd lost forever. Little did she know, this encounter was only the beginning. The next day, unable to resist the pull of the music, she returned to the shop, bringing with her a sense of curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, the tiniest bit of healing. Isco Expand Crow without heading 400 words my in simple English words. Part 3. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI-generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. One rainy afternoon, the young woman who had first stepped into the shop decided to thank the stranger for the profound effect his music was having on her life. She brewed a strong pot of tea, poured it into a thermos, and headed to the storefront. The rain pattered softly against the ground, blending with the gentle melodies drifting from inside. When she arrived, she hesitated for a moment, unsure if interrupting him would be appropriate. But something about the kindness in his music gave her courage, so she knocked lightly on the doorframe. The stranger paused mid-note and turned to face her. His expression was calm, almost as if he'd been expecting her. She held out the thermos shyly, mumbling a quiet, "Thank you." He nodded, accepting it without a word, and gestured for her to sit beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. He resumed playing, soft notes filling the room like whispers of comfort. She listened intently, feeling the weight in her chest ease little by little. When the piece ended, there was a long silence. Finally, the stranger sighed and began to speak, his voice low and steady. He told her about his past, how he had once been a celebrated pianist, traveling the world and performing in grand concert halls. Music had been his entire life, his greatest joy. But then, an accident left him unable to play the way he used to. A damaged nerve in his hand robbed him of the precision and speed required for complex performances. Overnight, everything he loved was taken away. At first, he fell into despair. He wandered from place to place, aimless and broken, carrying only his old piano as a reminder of what he'd lost. But over time, he discovered something unexpected. Even though he couldn't perform the same technical masterpieces, his music still had power. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about connection. Wherever he went, people responded to his playing in ways he hadn't anticipated. They shared their stories, opened up about their struggles, and found solace in the notes he coaxed from the battered keys. Slowly, he realized that his music could do more than entertain. It could heal. "I don't know why I came here," he admitted, his gaze distant. "Maybe I was looking for somewhere quiet to figure things out. Or maybe I needed to remind myself why I started playing in the first place." He glanced at her, his eyes softening. "You all have reminded me of that. Every person who walks through this door brings a piece of themselves. And somehow, my music becomes theirs too." She sat quietly, absorbing his words. There was such honesty in his voice, such vulnerability. She felt honored that he had chosen to share his story with her. As the rain continued to fall outside, she realized that the stranger wasn't just healing others. He was healing himself, one note at a time. When she finally stood to leave, she felt lighter, as if a burden she didn't even realize she was carrying had been lifted. Before stepping out, she looked back at him and said softly, "Thank you for sharing your music and for letting us be part of your journey." He smiled faintly, nodding again, and returned to the piano. Outside, the rain showed no sign of stopping, but inside, the air felt warm and full of promise. Isco Expand Crow without heading 400 words my in simple English words. Part 5. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI-generated. Also, don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also, don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. As autumn painted the town in hues of gold and crimson, the stranger made an announcement that left everyone stunned. He posted a small note on the shop's door. One final concert under the stars. Thank you for sharing your stories. The news spread quickly, and the townsfolk were filled with a mix of gratitude and sadness. They had grown so accustomed to his presence, to the comforting rhythm of his music weaving through their days, that the thought of him leaving felt like losing something precious all over again. The evening of the concert arrived, crisp and clear, with a sky full of twinkling stars. The entire town turned out, bringing blankets, chairs, and even picnic baskets. The park was transformed into a cozy gathering space, with strings of fairy lights strung between trees, casting a warm glow. Children chased each other playfully, while adults exchanged quiet smiles, savoring the moment. At the center of it all sat the old piano, looking as weathered as ever, but somehow more beautiful under the moonlight. When a stranger finally appeared, carrying a stool and taking his place at the piano, the crowd fell silent. For 2 hours, he played every melody he had shared during his time in the town, each piece evoking memories, emotions, and connections. There was the lilting tune that had first drawn the young woman to the shop, now accompanied by soft hums from the audience. Then came the playful rhythm that always made the kids giggle, followed by the hauntingly tender notes that had brought tears to so many eyes. Every song felt like a chapter in a story they had all lived together. Between pieces, the stranger paused occasionally, glancing at the faces around him. Some people wiped away tears, others held hands or leaned against loved ones. It wasn't just a performance. It was a collective experience, a celebration of everything they had been through and everything they had become because of his music. When he played the final piece, a slow, achingly beautiful melody, it felt like a farewell not just to him, but to the struggles they had faced before he arrived. As the last note faded into the night, there was a moment of absolute silence. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the entire town was holding its breath, unwilling to let the moment end. Finally, someone began to clap softly, and soon the applause swelled into a wave of gratitude. People stood up, cheering and calling out heartfelt thanks. The stranger simply nodded, his expression unreadable but deeply moving, before quietly packing up his things. That night, as the crowd dispersed and the park grew still once more, the air felt different. It carried a sense of closure, yes, but also of renewal. The stranger may have been leaving, but his music and the changes it had inspired would stay behind, woven into the fabric of their lives forever. Isco Expand Crow without heading 400 words in simple English words. Part 7. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. The next morning, the townsfolk woke to find the shop empty. The stranger was gone, leaving behind only his old piano and a handwritten note taped to the window. It read, "Music is not mine to keep. It belongs to those who need it most." The words lingered in the air, simple yet profound, like the melodies he had played. For a moment, there was a collective ache of loss, but it quickly gave way to determination. The town decided that the piano, and the spirit of what it represented, should stay. They turned the shop into a community center, a place where anyone could come to play or listen, ensuring that the stranger's gift would continue to live on. The young woman who had first connected with the stranger took charge of organizing weekly gatherings. She invited local musicians, amateur players, and even curious beginners to share their talents. Some evenings, the room buzzed with lively tunes. Other times, it was filled with quiet, introspective melodies. No matter the style, the music always seemed to bring people closer together. Kids learned to play simple songs while sitting cross-legged on the floor, giggling at their own mistakes. Adults found solace in experimenting with new chords, rediscovering parts of themselves they thought they'd lost. Over time, the community center became more than just a space for music. It became a hub of connection and healing. People continued to open up about their struggles, finding strength in shared experiences. The bakers started teaching baking classes alongside impromptu jam sessions, filling the air with the scent of fresh bread and laughter. The elderly man began hosting storytelling nights, sharing tales of his youth while someone played soft background music. Even the grumpy shopkeeper joined in, surprising everyone by singing an old folk song one evening, his voice rough but full of heart. Years passed, and though the stranger never returned, his influence remained woven into the fabric of the town. Visitors often remarked on how welcoming and harmonious the place felt, unaware of the journey its residents had taken. On quiet afternoons, you could still hear snippets of his melodies drifting through the park, played by children learning their first notes or hummed absent-mindedly by someone walking home. His music had become a part of them, a reminder that even in life's hardest moments, there's beauty to be found. And so, the little town thrived, not because it had forgotten its struggles, but because it had learned to face them together. The piano stood as a symbol of hope, proof that something as simple as music could bridge divides, mend wounds, and bring people closer. Though the stranger had vanished like a whisper in the wind, his legacy endured, in the laughter of children, the warmth of friendships, and the hearts of those he had touched. He may have been gone, but his melodies lived on, forever etched into the soul of the town. Inspired by the stranger became a regular. The young woman began sharing his story with others every evening. Not just to listen from afar, she was hesitant, but to sit with her words that felt in the cozy warmth of her apartment, like a gift. They talked for hours about music, but as she recounted his journey, everything she realized slowly, it wasn't just his. She began to see him as more than just a. It was the courage he showed in turning his. He was a mentor, something beautiful, a friend. His music had given him a way to heal the weight and emotion she carried. It was doing the same for everyone. One evening, as they sat together, people started opening up and said, revealing their own struggles in ways they never had before. Your playing is beautiful. The baker, yes, but it's also always greeted customers with a smile, like you're afraid to let go. Admitted during one of the evening gatherings that he often felt overwhelmed trying to raise his kids alone. I've spent years perfecting my technique. I put on a holy face. I'm giving everything I have. Some nights, he shook his head. I don't know how to keep gently. The crowd listened quietly. No, offering nods. You're giving everything they taught you. Someone suggested he join the weekly baking classes at the community center. But music isn't just about parents could share tips and stories while teaching kids how to make cookies. About the idea free from those invisible chains we build around ourselves. The classes became a regular event. His words lingered in her laughter back into long after he left. A shy teenager, was he right? Usually kept to himself. Had she been so focused on found the courage to speak about being bullied how to feel? His voice trembled as he talked about but also invisible and unwanted. For the first time, to everyone's surprise, she wondered what would happen if she stopped trying to control. Spoke up afterward. If she allowed herself to play my words because it felt good, he said, not because it was flushed with guilt. The next night, she decided to test his advice. Marked the beginning of an unlikely friendship. She closed her eyes and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys. Even the elderly man who spent his days sitting on a park bench, she focused on the emotions swirling. He told the group that he came to the park every day, hoping to reconnect with hope she tried so hard to bear. He used to play there as a child. And then, without overthinking it, someone suggested organizing a what came out was unlike anything, inviting everyone to bring loved ones. The melody was uneven at times. The elderly man finally received a call from his son, but it was alive in a way her previous pieces. It wasn't just big revelations. It was messy. It was unpredictable moments too. Achingly, a mother struggling to as the final note faded into silence. Parenting found comfort. She opened her eyes to find him watching over cups of tea. A soft smile. A mechanic battling loneliness that discovered joy quietly in mentoring teenagers really interested in cars. Tears welled up in her eyes. The grumpy shopkeeper, though she didn't try to hide them to customers, started offering freely to families in need. Felt terrifying, if this music could soften me, maybe I could soften someone else's day. They worked together through these shared experimenting with new styles and sounds. People weren't just listening to her own compositions. They were ones that reflected her true self. His melodies created a space where vulnerability wasn't scary, but healing. They crafted pieces wasn't inspired by their shared experiences. The shop became more than a place to hear beautiful tunes. Each one more personal. It became a hub of connection. Late nights, a reminder that early mornings truly as they poured their hearts into the music. Despite all the
Sometimes,
changes, she'd catch him
stranger
staring
remained
off
the
into the
same.
distance.
He continued
Lost in
playing his
thought,
piano with
and she'd
quiet
wonder what
dedication.
memories
His
he was
presence
reliving
grounding
through her melodies.
everyone around him.
Other times,
It was as if
he'd
his
share
music
stories
acted
about his
as a
late wife,
mirror,
how she
reflecting
used to
not
hum
just
along
their
to his
struggles,
compositions,
but also their
filling
strength.
their home with
With each
laughter
note,
and love.
he reminded
Those
them
moments
that
made her
even in
realize
brokenness,
that
there's
music wasn't
beauty,
just about
and that
expressing
together
pain.
they could find
It
a
was
way
about
forward.
celebrating connection,
Disco Expand
even in its
Crow,
absence.
without heading
By
400
the time
words
he
minds
left
each
simple
night,
English words,
she
Part
always
6,
felt
it
lighter,
should be interesting,
as though shedding
every
layers
part
of
should be
fear and
engaging,
doubt
so the
she hadn't
audience
known
doesn't
she'd
get
carry.
bored.
For the
Also
first time
keep
in
the
years,
wording simple,
making
and
music
natural
didn't
tone.
feel like a chore
Also make the
or an
script
obligation.
human-centric. It felt
and
like
don't give
breathing.
feel of
Free,
AI generated.
unfiltered,
Also,
and
don't
utterly
create
human.
violated content,
Disco Expand
which can
Crow
affect YouTube
without heading
policy.
400 words.
Also, don't
minds,
use names
simple
like
English
Marcus,
words. Part 6,
Sarah. It should be
Emma,
interesting,
Jamal,
and
etc.
every part should be engaging, so the audience doesn't get bored. Also, keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also, make the script human-centric, and don't give feel of AI generated. Also, don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also, don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc.